The envelope came 2 weeks after the others said they'd gotten theirs. My name wasn't spelled right. Ms. R. Madison. A typo that wouldn't have mattered if it hadn't come from Emberly's office. No personal note inside, just a standard RSVP and a yellow sticky slapped onto the back. Hope this gets to you in time. E. I held the card in my hand, staring at the glossy print. Crystal Creek Estate, formal attire, dinner to follow. Everything about it felt rehearsed, like I was being summoned for an audience, not invited to witness a wedding. My brother's wedding. Theron hadn't called in months. He didn't send a text or a check-in, just this card, wrapped in pretended warmth. I turned it over once, twice, then tossed it on the counter. I made coffee, stared out the window at the garden I'd kept alive through years nobody asked about. I wasn't sure why this one stung differently. Maybe it was the tone, or maybe I'd just finally gotten tired of playing along. I thought about skipping it, about pretending I never received anything, but then, a voice in me whispered, go, not for celebration, not for closure. Go to see who they've become, who you've become, standing next to them. So I circled yes on the card, tucked it back into the envelope, and mailed it the next morning, not as a guest, as a witness. I arrived an hour early. The valet didn't know what to do with me because I didn't arrive in a rental or a luxury vehicle. I wore a navy wool blend dress and a brooch that belonged to my Aunt Lila. Nothing flashy, but I wasn't there to be seen. At the reception check-in, the woman with the headset looked confused when I gave her my name. I don't see you on the list. Are you with catering? I blinked once. No. Oh, sorry. Let me check the overflow list. She printed a generic place card, no name, just a barcode, and handed it to me with a strained smile. This way. She led me past the floral centerpiece and the chandelier, past the main dining room, to a table tucked near the service hallway. Cold air wafted in every time the kitchen door swung open. My tablemates were a cousin I hadn't seen in a decade, his second wife, and a family friend who kept asking me if I was still figuring things out. I smiled, stirred my water with the lemon wedge, said nothing. Even here, in a room full of champagne flutes and peonies, I was still the footnote. During the appetizers, the table next to us buzzed about Emberly. She's done so well for herself, hasn't she? Someone said. Honestly, she's polishing the family brand. Theron got lucky, another added. No one looked in my direction. No one asked where I'd been or what I'd been building. A distant cousin tried to remember a headline with my name in it, something about an investment, but the details trailed off into another glass of wine. That thing you were doing, she said, waving a hand. The tech stuff? Something like that, I answered. I kept my tone even. They didn't want the whole story. They wanted their version of it. Success, in my family, was always the loudest voice in the room. Whoever bought the most ad space in people's memories won the spotlight. I had long since stopped bidding. I focused on the contrast, the noise, the colors, the curated playlists, all designed to project importance. I'd spent my life mistaking that for value. The salad course arrived, and with it came napkins embroidered with each guest's name, except mine. The staff moved through the room, placing them with ceremony. When they got to me, the server paused, then looked back toward the kitchen. Damaris, the coordinator, appeared with a white napkin, plain, nothing on it. We had one extra, she said, placing it gently. Hope this is okay. I nodded, folded it once, then slipped it into my clutch instead of my lap. My grandmother used to say, if your name's not on the linen, it's not on their mind. I never thought that would become literal. I looked around. At the table placements, the speeches being passed out for Emberly's parents, the handshakes, the polished shoes. This event wasn't meant to include me, just to account for me. They didn't forget me. They erased me. The light inside the ballroom had softened, shifting from gold to amber as evening rolled in. It had been a quiet afternoon after the awkward brunch. I kept mostly to myself, took a short walk around the estate gardens, and returned in time for the welcome dinner. I didn't dress to impress, just enough to blend in, maybe disappear altogether if I felt like it. Slate gray dress, no jewelry except the brooch again, and hair pinned up loose. As soon as I stepped into the room, it hit me. How rehearsed everything felt. Candles spaced with mathematical precision, jazz trio near the window, their sound just loud enough to suggest luxury, not joy. The type of setting where everyone looked ready for a photo, not a memory. No one greeted me. Theron was laughing near the drink station, arms draped around two groomsmen I didn't recognize. Emberly waved like someone waving to a coworker they barely liked. She didn't move toward me. I was barely 2 steps in when a woman in a silk shawl tapped my arm. "Excuse me, do you know where the restrooms are? I've walked this circle 3 times." I glanced at her, nodded politely. Back past the piano to the right. She smiled without thanks and walked off. I watched her go, then looked down at my shoes. I'd worn these to 3 different launch events in New York, and yet here, someone thought I was part of the staff, or at least invisible enough to be asked like one. Image, I thought. Image controls everything here. I moved toward the back of the room, close enough to be seen, not close enough to be questioned. It didn't take long before Emberly made her rounds with Bram Bonin, her boss. He was tall, too tan for fall in Colorado, and the kind of man who smiled only with his mouth. The way she walked beside him, shoulders tight but chin high, made it clear she was parading him, not hosting him. "Bram, I'd love for you to meet some of the people who matter most to me," she said. The list included her former professor, 2 influencers I only recognized from someone else's Instagram story, and a man who claimed to be a serial startup advisor without naming one company he'd ever helped. Then she got to me. Her tone shifted. Just a notch. "And this," she said, resting a perfectly manicured hand on my shoulder, "is Rhea, Theron's sister. She's between jobs right now. A bit of a free spirit, you know." She said it with a soft laugh, eyes already darting to the next person in line. My stomach didn't drop. It didn't twist. It hardened. Bram looked at me and raised an eyebrow. Not curiosity, not judgment, just the mild confusion of someone whose brain tugged at a thread of recognition but hadn't placed it yet. I nodded once. "Pleasure," I said. He held my gaze for half a second too long. Then Emberly ushered him along to another cluster of guests. Laughter resumed. The moment was over before it began. Nobody else blinked. A few nodded at me like I'd just confirmed my place on the outskirts. I stayed there, where I stood, processing the introduction. I didn't need Emberly to respect me, but I needed her to know I saw exactly what she'd just done. I crossed to the bar, ordered a soda water, and leaned against the wall near the service corridor. It wasn't that I didn't belong, it was that I was inconvenient to include. A server brushed past and, in a moment of confusion, tried to hand me a tray of hors d'oeuvres. Then her eyes widened. "Oh, I'm so sorry, I thought—" "It's fine," I said. "You're not the first to assume that tonight." She gave a half smile and hurried away. I stayed there a while, observing the room the way someone studies a chessboard before moving a single piece, watching who laughed the hardest, who stood near whom, who noticed the missing pieces, and who didn't care, and I kept replaying it. Between jobs. Free spirit. Little words, sharp words, the kind of introduction you give to someone you want the room to forget. I didn't go to her. I didn't make a scene. I just stood and thought, what would have happened if I told Bram the truth right then? I could have named the patents, the companies, the equity, but I didn't. Because something my mentor told me once came back clear as glass. Let them underestimate you. That's the only time they're truly honest. So I let it sit. I noted who avoided my eyes, who smiled too tightly, who laughed a little too loudly when Emberly was in earshot. And I knew, you only get introduced once, but you get to define yourself forever. By the time morning broke over Crystal Creek, the air had shifted again, still crisp but heavier. You could smell the champagne from the night before clinging to the grass, like the event was still sweating out its performance. I dressed simply. A linen blouse, slacks, no jewelry. Just presence. The brunch was set by the lake, all white parasols and tablecloths, small name cards nestled under mimosa glasses. I walked in alone, again. A few heads turned. Some nodded. Others offered that thin-lipped smile people use when they want to seem polite without opening conversation. I made my way to the table where my name had been added in pen, different from the others. I didn't care anymore. Correction was exhausting. I sat, sipped orange juice, and waited for the day to unfold. Damaris, ever the stage manager, eventually clapped her hands and called out over the soft chatter. Family photo by the dock! Chairs scraped, voices rose. People stood quickly, adjusting dresses and jackets. I stood too, instinctively, started walking. Then came the gentle redirect. We're doing immediate family first, Damaris said, her smile practiced. We'll do extended right after. Extended. I hesitated, just a second. Someone behind me coughed softly. I stepped aside. They filed past me. Theron, Emberly, our parents, a few kids. The rest of us watched. A distant cousin gave me a tight shrug, as if to say, not your moment. The photographer didn't ask who was missing. He didn't scan the edges, just lifted his camera and said, Ready? 1, 2. I turned before 3. I used to joke I wasn't photogenic. I didn't know one day I'd be unphotographable. Back at my table, conversation leaned into nostalgia, old stories, college years, childhood embarrassments. Emberly, with a flute of champagne in hand, laughed and shared a tale about offering someone Theron's couch years ago because he had a friend staying with him who was figuring things out. She didn't say my name. She didn't have to. People laughed. Theron just stirred his drink and stared into the glass like it held the script to get him out of the moment. I chewed slowly, kept my fork poised mid-air. They turned my hardest moment into a sitcom anecdote. The years I spent scraping myself back together, repackaged as quirky charm. A cousin leaned in. You've come a long way, she said, softly. Good for you. I nodded, because what else do you do? Funny how, when they control the story, they keep the shame and erase the climb. I excused myself before the plates were cleared, walked toward the lake, toward the old wooden bench at the edge of the dock. I sat, watched the ripples. The real story was quieter, less laughable. Back then, I had just liquidated my share of a startup, sold early to cover debts my parents didn't even know they had. Their house was weeks from being pulled into foreclosure. I used my share to clean it up, bought them 3 more years of quiet living before the world knocked again. The couch came after that. Theron didn't ask questions when I showed up, didn't offer the guest room either. Said the couch was soft enough and pointed to a folded blanket. I didn't argue. I needed the roof more than I needed warmth. That first night, I curled up on that couch with an NDA settlement tucked inside a manila folder under my head. My pillow was half business, half heartbreak. No one knew, because I never told them. Because back then, I still believed silence meant strength, that if you swallowed the pain with enough grace, you'd earn back your place. I whispered aloud, grace without truth is just quiet suffering. When I got back to the reception area, people were lingering near the buffet. I stepped aside, pulled out my phone, and opened the photo album Damaris had posted to the family group. There it was, the estate backdrop, Theron in the middle, arm around Emberly, our mother in a pastel scarf. My chair at the table still empty. I zoomed in. The spot where I should have stood, center left, had been taken by Emberly's stylist, blonde, smiling, not family, not even close. They didn't forget to include me. They planned the picture they wanted, and I started planning mine. By mid-afternoon, the clouds had settled like a heavy curtain across the sky. The cocktail reception was already in motion by the time I walked through the south corridor near the conservatory. I'd shown up early, not to help, not to hover, just to make sure I could control the one thing I had left, my own entrance. The board outside showed the table layout, though my name was absent again. Not even a post-it this time. Damaris spotted me from across the room and gave that same dismissive hand wave I'd come to expect from her. It's flow style tonight, she said. No assignments, just mingle and enjoy. Mingle and enjoy. I nodded and stepped inside. Emberly stood by the fireplace, her hand on Theron's chest as if she were pinning herself to his credibility. They were surrounded, laughing with people I hadn't seen before, all teeth and confidence. Someone handed Theron a drink. Emberly turned to greet a group of investors from her firm. A waiter passed by me and stopped. He handed me a glass of water without asking. Thanks, I said, more to be polite than because I wanted it. I drifted to the corner of the room, where the edge of a buffet table shielded me from most views. From here, I could see everything without being in it. And truthfully, that was becoming second nature. When you've been ignored long enough, blending in becomes effortless. About 30 minutes in, I heard Theron's voice rise above the chatter. All right, he said, tapping his glass with a fork. Let's do a few toasts. Nothing formal, just some words from the people who matter most. People clapped, chairs shifted. The music dipped into the background. Emberly took center floor first. She thanked her parents, twice, then her mentor, who wasn't present. Then a list of vague colleagues and collaborators that somehow didn't include the person who paid part of this whole setup. She paused dramatically before turning to Theron, her eyes all softness and gratitude. And to the man who made me believe that good things don't come from luck, but from alignment, she said, squeezing his hand. Everyone clapped again. She looked toward our mother and nodded. The next glass raised came from Uncle Alan, then Theron's high school friend, then even Damaris said something about the spirit of unity. No one said my name. I raised my glass anyway. A few heads turned. Not many. One waiter walked past and leaned toward me, whispering near my shoulder. They asked if you could help serve the next round during the mother of the bride's speech. I turned my head slowly. He looked nervous. I'll pass, I said. He nodded and kept moving. Another girl in black took the tray from him and walked toward the center. Even the air here knew who was supposed to be heard and who should pour. It wasn't long after that when a woman I didn't recognize stopped beside me near the hydrangeas by the patio doors. Emberly mentioned you'd done some great nonprofit work, she said, her tone warm, sweet. That's so admirable, so rare these days. I felt it before I thought it. Emberly had taken my decade of consulting, 3 startup acquisitions, and a stint running a tech equity program, and packaged it into community work, a narrative where I wasn't ambitious. I was charitable, not effective, just sweet. I smiled. Yes, I said, sipping what was left in my glass. Community work changes lives, especially the ones we think don't need help. The woman nodded thoughtfully and walked away. I stepped outside to the garden. Some families were taking photos beneath the trellis. A few kids ran between the tables. The air was thinner out here and quieter. I leaned against the railing and looked at the guests milling around. And I began mentally drafting what I would have said if they'd handed me the mic. Something real, something not designed for applause but for pause. Let them call it charity. The right people know the value of silence. Later, I stood near the dessert table, debating whether to try a chocolate tart when Emberly appeared beside me. She leaned in, smiling like someone pretending not to be condescending. We didn't want to put you on the spot for a toast, she said. Didn't know if that was your thing these days. My back straightened, but my voice didn't rise. I've never needed a microphone to leave an impact, I said. Her smile twitched, almost cracked, but didn't disappear. She didn't reply, and I didn't wait for her to. But I could feel it. The next time I was handed a glass, I wouldn't just be raising it. The lounge smelled faintly of citrus and melting wax. Small tables had been scattered across the room, just enough to create the illusion of intimacy without ever risking it. Candles flickered like they were trying too hard. A string quartet played somewhere behind a curtain. The rehearsal dinner was beginning. I arrived early again, didn't want to be surprised. I sat near the back, ginger ale in hand, and let the room fill around me. I hadn't been told to speak, and I didn't expect it. Theron started by welcoming everyone, thanking them for traveling, for believing in their story. Emberly's friends were called on next. One after another, they stood and spoke about resilience, alignment, energy, buzzwords instead of memories, polished like everything else here. Then Theron raised his glass toward Emberly and called her his North Star. He thanked her circle for amplifying their brand of love. No mention of me. I crossed my arms, didn't blink. I didn't need the spotlight anymore, but I would have liked my name. Just once. People stood and stretched as the toasts ended. Conversation restarted in soft clusters. I stayed seated, watching the buzz swirl around me like wind through brittle leaves. That's when Ziva walked over. She was my mother's oldest friend. wore floral scarves year-round, and talked like she was narrating a documentary. "You know," she said, leaning in like she was about to share a secret, "you've always been the sweet one, not flashy, but dependable. That's more important than success anyway." She smiled like it was a compliment. I didn't respond. "Not everyone needs to win big to matter," she added. "You stayed real." I nodded, small, automatic. Nearby, a few heads turned toward us. Some nodded in agreement. I could feel it, how they thought they were being kind. They'd turned my restraint into failure, my silence into smallness. They'd rewritten me while I was still in the room. I got up, walked to the drink station, refilled my glass, though I wasn't thirsty, took a napkin, folded it once, then again, pressed it flat. I didn't shake. I didn't cry. But something in me hardened. Theron found me about 20 minutes later. His hands were in his pockets, eyes scanning, but not looking at me. "Hey," he said. "Hey." He glanced around. "This place is pretty great, huh? Emberly's really outdone herself." I said nothing. "You comfortable?" he asked. That was the line. That was the one that did it. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked, "when she rewrote my work, my name, my story?" He shifted, eyes somewhere over my shoulder. "This weekend isn't the time." I stared at him. "You've said that every year," I replied. "About everything." He didn't move, didn't apologize, just looked at his shoes like maybe they'd walk him out of this. I didn't wait for an answer. I walked. Silence is the most elegant betrayal. It leaves no scars, just empty spaces where your voice used to live. I stepped out into the courtyard. The music inside was just a hum through glass now, air cooler, heavier. I sat on the stone bench near the edge, watching candlelight flicker in windows I didn't belong to. I thought about younger me, the one who believed family stood up when it mattered, the one who thought kindness earned something. "If they've made peace with forgetting me," I whispered, "maybe I need to make peace with letting go." A server passed with a tray of champagne flutes. I shook my head. I didn't need to toast anything. Didn't need a mic. I just needed the truth to stop hiding. And I was done waiting for someone else to speak it. I didn't enter through the main doors this time. Instead, I slipped in through the side entrance, the one by the utility corridor near the floral delivery ramp. No photographers, no smiles, just the echo of staff shoes on tile and the clinking of glass racks. The dress I wore was black, minimalist. I'd picked it for myself, no one's approval in mind. As I stepped through the hallway, a man in a tailored suit turned and, without hesitation, held out his empty wine glass toward me. Didn't even look at my face. I took it, not because I was staff, but because sometimes it's easier to let them assume. I passed it to a server nearby, then kept walking. From behind, I heard a voice I recognized. "You're doing a great job tonight. So graceful." One of Emberly's friends. A woman who once asked if I was still in between things. I gave her a nod. No words, just tightened my grip on the clutch at my side. Inside it, the napkin, the one they'd left blank. They don't see me. They see what they need me to be. The lights in the ballroom were dimmed, giving the illusion of warmth. Theron clinked his glass. "We have something special," he said. "A surprise. A video montage from friends and family who couldn't be here." The screen behind the band flickered to life. Laughter, childhood clips, friends recounting memories over wine, Emberly's parents in Italy, holding hands, a former teacher beaming with pride. I watched, patient. I'd sent in my clip 3 days earlier. At Emberly's request, she'd even said, "Keep it short, warm, and personal. Your family, after all." The video rolled on, then faded to black. Applause. I waited. Nothing. Emberly took the mic. "We had so many clips, we had to trim a few," she said with a soft laugh. "You know how it is. Most people didn't notice. A few did." I caught the eyes of 1 or 2 relatives across the room. Brief glances. Then they looked away. I didn't flinch. Didn't ask. Just sipped my sparkling water. It wasn't an oversight. It was a message, and I'd received it. I excused myself quietly and stepped into the hallway again. The sound of the band was muffled by the heavy wooden doors. There, in the dim light beside the restroom sign, I opened my clutch, The napkin was still folded neatly. No name, no embroidery. But I'd changed that. In my own handwriting, stitched into the edge with thread I'd brought from home. It read, "Unclaimed doesn't mean unworthy." I looked at it, not with pain, but with calm, with certainty. I texted Patrick, my attorney, the man who'd been waiting for this message, 3 words. "Prep the documents." Then I added, "I'm done playing nice." The napkin wasn't a reminder of what they took. It was what I reclaimed. I don't need to be in their video. I'll be the part of this story they can't delete. I walked back into the ballroom slower this time, straighter. Something had shifted, and I knew it wasn't just me. I passed Emberly's college roommate, who smiled and asked, "Having fun this weekend?" I smiled back. "I've learned more this weekend than any other." She laughed, not sure if I was joking. I wasn't. As I moved across the room, the small talk felt like background noise. I was watching everything now. Calculated, not bitter, just clear. Across the floor, Emberly stood with Theron, her hand on his shoulder like she was holding him in place. She caught my eye, and I smiled, not because I forgave her, but because I was finally ready to answer. The morning of the wedding smelled like damp stone and overwatered roses. Crews were finishing last-minute details across the lawn, chairs wiped dry, petals scattered with too much symmetry, and lanterns strung just high enough to suggest romance. I walked the gravel path slowly, not because I needed to, because I could. Then I saw it. The arch, white roses, soft coral accents, 3 vertical columns framing the couple's aisle. It was my design, down to the way the drapery tucked on the left, slightly off-center. 3 years ago, I pitched it to an event agency. They said it was too unconventional. Never used it. Or so I thought. And there was Emberly, standing in front of it with a group of guests, saying, "It's a friend's vision I've always loved." Felt like the right moment to bring it to life. She didn't say whose vision. She never did. I didn't say anything either. But I took out my phone, snapped a picture. Another. Close-ups. Wide angle. When they steal quietly, they don't expect receipts. Later that morning, I passed by the kids' table under the tent. My niece, Lila, Theron's youngest, pulled gently on my wrist. "Are you the helper lady?" she asked. Before I could answer, another child piped up. "My mom said you were like the fun aunt, not real family, but good to have around." They meant well. Kids always do. I smiled, crouched to Lila's height, and said, "I'm the one who makes sure people don't get forgotten." They giggled and ran back to the coloring station. I stood slowly, took a breath that didn't go down easy. In trying to stay kind, I had made space for my own erasure. You can't stay quiet forever and still expect them to remember your voice. I needed a few minutes alone. I slipped into one of the dressing rooms off the east wing, meant for the bridal party, but empty now. I sat on the edge of the chaise and opened my clutch. Inside was the envelope, not just paper, certified, tracked. Signed. 6 weeks ago, Emberly asked me to help cover part of the venue deposit. Quietly, of course. "You know how families get about money," she'd said. "It's not about credit, it's just support." And I agreed, because I still thought this wedding was about something real. Now, I understood. They built the platform using my money, to erase me from the picture standing on it. I unfolded the receipt, ran my finger over the bottom, my signature, small but permanent. They wouldn't expect it to reappear today, but it would, not out of revenge, not to embarrass, to remind, to reclaim. I tucked the envelope back inside my clutch, then stood in front of the mirror, straightened my collar, fixed the single hair falling near my ear. The reflection didn't look sad anymore, or angry, just done pretending. The hallway outside buzzed with movement, photographers adjusting lenses, guests being guided to their seats, Emberly laughing from somewhere near the entrance. I walked calmly toward the ballroom, sharp, still, aware. As I stepped inside, the hush before the ceremony was already settling in, music playing low, the officiant straightening their notes. Theron caught my eye but didn't hold it. That was fine. My mother smiled at me the way people smile when they want you to behave. That was fine too, because I had one card left to play. And when I handed over that envelope, it wouldn't be with trembling hands. The sun had already dipped low, casting long amber shadows through the tall windows of the main ballroom. Everything had been timed for the golden hour. Lighting, music, the aisle setup. Someone had calculated beauty down to the second. Guests were taking their seats. Some fanned themselves with printed programs. Others were still mingling around the cocktail bar, squeezing in last-minute congratulations before the ceremony started. I entered from the back, quiet, alone, clutch still in my hand. The envelope inside felt heavier than paper, not just because of the check, but because I knew what it meant, what it represented. Emberly stood under the arch, surrounded by camera flashes, curated poses, and practiced smiles. Theron stood beside her, posture rigid, smile tight. Bram Bonin, her boss, sat in the front row, expression unreadable. The officiant spoke. They exchanged vows. Everyone clapped. I clapped once, not for them, for myself. They planned the perfect scene. But not the perfect silence. After the ceremony, we transitioned to the reception. No formal break, just an elegant shift in lighting and glassware. As people trickled toward the dining tables, someone wheeled out a large gift box display. White ribbons, crystal handles, a touch too much for subtlety. A staff member announced, "We've received an anonymous gift, one that left quite the impression." He held up the check. $50,000, no signature, just the printed name of the couple and a delivery slip. Emberly gasped loud enough for the back row. "Oh my God," she said. That has to be from Bram's people." She glanced at him, fishing for a nod. Bram didn't offer one. Instead, he asked to see the envelope. The staff member handed it over. Bram scanned the handwriting, then paused. His head turned slowly and looked straight at me. We held that look longer than we should have. Guests noticed. Murmurs started. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He stood. The mic screeched lightly as Bram approached the stage. "Before I say anything else tonight," he began, voice steady, "I'd like to acknowledge the person who gave this gift." He held up the check, not because of the amount, but because of what it symbolizes. He turned to the crowd, then back to me. "She's sitting in the back, as she always does, not because she's forgotten, but because she's been conditioned to believe her silence is politeness." All heads turned. "She's not unemployed," he said, his voice rising just enough. "She's not lost. She's not figuring things out." A pause. "She's one of the smartest minds I've ever worked with, and I stand on a platform she helped build." Gasps, shuffling chairs, people murmuring names, questions whispered too loudly. I stayed seated. I didn't cry. I didn't clap. I didn't flinch. I listened. The truth doesn't need volume. It just needs the right room. As the applause faded, Emberly stepped up, trying to regain control. She touched Bram's arm lightly, smiled too widely. "Thank you, Bram," she said. "That was unexpected." She looked at the crowd. "We all come from somewhere," she added. "I'm just grateful to stand beside people who never stopped moving forward." Some people nodded. Others didn't. Bram didn't say another word. Instead, he turned to Theron. "You never told me Rhea was your sister," he said. Theron swallowed. "Didn't come up." Bram raised an eyebrow. "Why hide that?" Theron didn't answer. Emberly tugged gently at his jacket. I stood up, walked through the aisle they'd forgotten to give me earlier, pulled the embroidered napkin from my clutch, the one that used to be blank, the one I'd stitched with my own words. Unclaimed doesn't mean unworthy. I placed it gently on the head table. Didn't say a word. Didn't have to. And then I turned and walked out, leaving them to answer what they could no longer spin. The morning after was quiet, not peaceful, just quiet, the kind that settles after the storm, not because everything's fine, but because everyone's too tired to talk about what blew apart. I walked barefoot across the dewy grass, heels dangling from one hand. The courtyard looked exactly like it had the day before. Except now, there were no lanterns glowing, no music playing, no curated laughter floating across the breeze. No one called me. No one chased after me when I left that ballroom. And I wasn't surprised. This place had always felt hollow. Not because it was empty, but because it had been filled with things that didn't matter. I rounded the corner toward the breakfast tables. That's when I saw her. My mother. Sitting alone, half-eaten muffin in front of her, fingers flipping slowly through the guest book like it might reveal something different the second time around. She looked up when I approached. Her expression didn't change. She just said, "You looked elegant last night, but you didn't have to do all that." I didn't sit. I didn't explain. I just said, "And you didn't have to let them forget me." "But you did." She didn't respond, didn't apologize, didn't deny it either. There are some apologies we never hear. But that doesn't mean we weren't owed them. I made my way toward the exit path behind the hedges, the one that looped around toward the gravel lot. That's when I felt a tap on my elbow. I turned. A young man, early 20s maybe, stood there in catering uniform. Nervous, but trying to look casual. "Hi," he said. "Sorry to bother you. Are you Ria?" I nodded slowly. "I wanted to thank you. 10 years ago, I got a scholarship. Through a fund in your name. I was told not to bring it up here, but I had to say it anyway. It changed my life." I stared at him. Didn't speak for a second. Then my voice found itself again. "You didn't have to say that." "I did," he smiled. Walked off toward the delivery trucks. I stood there for a moment, the sound of gravel crunching under someone else's shoes filling the space behind me. Real impact doesn't need a stage. It just needs memory. Back at my car, I unlocked the trunk and placed my clutch inside. Then paused. Opened it. Took out the napkin. The same one I'd laid on the table yesterday. The same one I stitched. The same one that started blank. I didn't leave it behind. Not because I needed to prove anything, but because I finally knew what it was. Not a protest, not a weapon, just the thing I had to reclaim from myself. I folded it neatly, slipped it into the glove box, closed the trunk. Before I opened the door, I glanced at the rearview mirror. "Let them tell their version," I said aloud. "I'll live mine." Then I slid into the seat and started the engine. My phone buzzed, a voicemail. It was from Patrick, my attorney. "Hey, just confirming that the donation was recorded in your name, not anonymously. It's filed, notarized, and public. No one can walk that back." I nodded, even though he couldn't hear me. The truth now lived somewhere permanent, not in whispers, not in shadows. As I pulled out of the estate's long driveway, I didn't look back at the buildings. I didn't think about who was still inside, what they were saying, what they'd spin. It didn't matter anymore. Halfway down the road, my phone buzzed again. A text this time, from Lila, my niece. "Can we talk sometime soon? I think I got things wrong." I didn't answer right away. But I smiled. Faint. Not bitter. Healing may never be perfect. But maybe it can begin. You don't have to burn bridges. Some crumble on their own. All you have to do is walk away from the smoke. And I never looked back. But I made sure they'd always remember who walked away.